The papers were signed before she even knew she'd been sold. Outside, the wind howled through broken shutters, carrying the scent of rain and decay through the once grand Hart estate. The chandelier in the foyer trembled with each crack of thunder, its crystals catching the faint glow of the dying fire. Evelyn stood in the shadow of the staircase, her breath shallow as voices drifted from her father's study. She had grown up listening to that voice, Richard Hart's voice, once full of laughter and pride, now worn and rough, cracked by whiskey and regret. Tonight it trembled in a way she had never heard before. Across from him, another voice spoke, calm, measured, like polished marble. Alexander Drake, a name she had heard whispered in business circles, always followed by words like ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. "You understand the terms, Mr. Hart," Alexander said, his tone as smooth as glass. "The debt is cleared upon completion of the agreement." "And she'll be taken care of?" Richard asked, his voice breaking. "More than you could ever provide," Alexander replied. "She'll want for nothing." Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, her pulse roaring in her ears. Want for nothing. As if comfort could replace freedom. She watched through the thin crack of the door as her father's trembling hand reached for the pen. The flash of lightning outside illuminated the signature, his name sealing her fate. The papers fluttered as the thunder rolled, and in that instant, something inside her shattered. She pushed open the door with a trembling hand. "What are you doing?" Her voice broke through the silence like a blade. Richard froze. Alexander's dark eyes turned toward her, unreadable beneath the lamplight. He didn't look surprised, almost as if he had expected her. His presence filled the room like gravity, calm amid the storm. "Evelyn," Richard whispered, standing too quick. Cly, nearly knocking over his glass. "You shouldn't be here." "Then where should I be, Father?" she shot back, her voice shaking. "Sold along with the furniture?" His face crumpled, guilt spilling through the cracks of his exhaustion. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "They were going to take everything, the house, the land. They would have taken you. So you gave me to a stranger instead?" Her voice rose, sharp and trembling. "You could have told me, at least let me choose." Alexander stood, his movement controlled, deliberate. "It wasn't your choice," he said quietly. "Nor his. The world doesn't wait for choice, Miss Hart. It demands payment." The words chilled her more than the rain outside. There was something in his eyes, something that wasn't cruelty, but something colder, heavier. Regret, perhaps, or recognition. She turned on him. "And what is it you get, Mr. Drake? A wife? A possession? Or just a convenient way to polish your reputation?" He met her gaze without flinching. "Protection," he said simply. "From debts you don't even know you have, from men who see you as more than a bargaining chip. You'll be safe in my care." The word safe echoed in her mind like a taunt. Safety at the price of her soul. Richard sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. "Please, Evelyn," he murmured. "You have to trust me. It's the only way." She wanted to scream, to shatter every fragile lie that had brought them here, but all she could do was stand there, watching the rain blur against the window, and realize that her life had been traded for a signature. Alexander reached for his coat, his movements precise, detached. "A car will collect you in the morning," he said. "Bring only what you can't bear to lose." When he left, the door closed with the softest sound, too gentle for a man who had just bought another's life. Evelyn sank to the floor, or as her father whispered her name, his voice full of the sorrow of a man who had already buried everything he loved. The storm raged on outside, drowning his apologies. In the flicker of lightning, Evelyn stared at the papers on the desk, her father's signature inked beneath Alexander Drake's, and knew that her world had just been rewritten. She didn't know what awaited her beyond the storm, only that the man who had bought her freedom was a stranger with eyes that held too many secrets, and that nothing about this arrangement was as simple as it seemed. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air still carried the taste of thunder when Evelyn stepped outside her home for what she knew might be the last time her father stood by the door, pale and silent, unable to meet her eyes. She wanted to say something, anything that would make sense of what he had done, but all the words in the world felt too small for the betrayal that hung between them. A black car waited at the gate, gleaming like a shadow on wheels. The driver stepped forward without a word, opening the door. His suit was pressed, his expression unreadable, the kind of man who served power without question. Evelyn hesitated for a heartbeat, glancing back at the cracked windows and wilted roses of her childhood home. Then she climbed in. As the car pulled away, the world blurred past in streaks of gray and green. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, trying not to cry. She told herself she would not give Alexander Drake or anyone else that power, but every mile took her farther from who she had been, and closer to something unknown. Hours later, the car turned off the main road, winding up a long gravel drive lined with tall iron gates that rose like sentinels on either side. Beyond them stood the estate, an endless expanse of marble terraces and dark glass. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. She half expected lightning to split the sky again, just to complete the picture. When she stepped out, the scent of rain mingled with something sharper metal and stone. The front doors opened before she could knock. Alexander Drake stood waiting, his dark suit perfectly pressed, his silver watch glinting faintly in the light. He was taller than she remembered from the night before, and far more intimidating in daylight. His presence filled the entire entrance hall, as if he commanded not just the house, but the air itself. "Welcome," he said simply, his tone polite but distant. "You must be tired. I'll show you to your room." She followed him through a corridor lined with oil paintings and mirrors that reflected her uneasy face. He moved with the calm precision of a man who never had to hurry, never had to explain himself. Every step echoed on the marble floor like a warning. When he finally opened a door on the second floor, she froze. The room was stunning, sunlight spilling through tall arched windows, pale curtains drifting with the breeze. The bed looked like it belonged in a palace, not a prison, yet that was what it felt like. "I expect you'll need time to adjust," he said, standing by the window, his reflection faint in the glass. "This arrangement is not what you think." Evelyn turned sharply. "Then, tell me what it is, because from where I stand, it looks like you bought me." He didn't flinch. Instead, his gaze softened slightly, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You're not here as property. You're here under protection. Your father's debts were more dangerous than you know." "Protection?" She repeated the word, felt heavy on her tongue, from whom he hesitated as if choosing whether to lie or not. Finally, he said, "From people who would have taken more than your freedom." He left before she could question him further. When the door clicked shut behind him, she walked to the window. The estate stretched for miles, surrounded by woods and guarded walls. She could see security cameras hidden among the trees and guards patrolling the perimeter. This wasn't a home midway, as a fortress, but who was being kept out and who was being kept in.
Later that evening a knock sounded on her door. A young maid entered carrying a tray. "Dinner, miss, from Mr. Drake's orders." Evelyn looked at the silver domes covering the food, steam curling in the air. The maid's eyes flickered nervously before she spoke again. "If I may, miss, they say he doesn't bring people here, not since what happened in the North Wing." "The North Wing?" Evelyn asked, but the maid's face went pale as if she had already said too much. "Forgive me, miss," she whispered and hurried out, leaving Evelyn alone with her untouched meal. She stood by the window long after dark, watching as lights flickered on across the estate one by one until only a single window in the farthest part of the mansion remained lit, faint and distant, glowing against the night. She didn't know what waited for her inside those walls, but one thing was certain: Alexander Drake wasn't just a man with secrets, he was a man who lived inside them, and now she was part of his mystery, whether she wanted to be or not. The following night a strange sound woke Evelyn from restless sleep. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried through the walls, then came again a soft echo of footsteps where no one should be. She sat up listening, the moonlight spilling through her window painted silver lines across the floor. The sound came from the hallway beyond her door. Slow, deliberate pacing. She slipped out of bed, heart hammering, the floorboards cool beneath her bare feet. When she opened the door, the hallway stretched ahead. Silent and empty, the chandeliers were dimmed, casting long shadows that seemed to breathe as the wind sighed through the old walls. She took a hesitant step forward, her nightgown brushing the marble. A door at the far end stood slightly ajar, a flicker of light escaping through the crack. It was the same hallway she had walked earlier with Alexander, but now it felt different, alive with something unseen. The air
The next morning she tried to forget the encounter, but the servants' eyes told her they too carried pieces of the same unspoken story. Whispers drifted through the hall when she passed. "They say the lady died there," someone murmured, not knowing she heard. "They say it was an accident. Others say she never left at all." Later that evening, Alexander appeared at dinner, his usual composure perfectly restored. He asked politely if the room was comfortable. She forced a smile, but inside her questions boiled. "What happened in the north wing?" she asked quietly. His knife paused midway through cutting his food. The silence that followed stretched too long. Finally, he set the silverware down and looked at her. "The north wing holds my past and my punishment." He said nothing more. That night, Evelyn lay awake, unable to shake the feeling that she was living inside someone else's unfinished story. A house haunted not by ghosts, but by guilt. She promised herself she would not go back to that wing, but curiosity is a powerful thing, and deep down she knew she would return, even if it meant uncovering truths meant to stay buried, because somewhere in those shadows was the reason she had been brought here, and she intended to find it, no matter the cost. The storm returned 2 nights later, shaking the windows and filling the mansion with the restless sound of wind. Evelyn sat by the fire in her room, unable to focus on the book she held. Lightning flashed across the sky, casting sharp light over the walls. She thought she saw movement in the hallway. Again, a shadow, too tall to be a servant. She hesitated, then rose. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the corridor, leading once again toward the forbidden north wing. Her heart raced as she followed the sound, the air colder with every step. The hall stretched longer than she remembered. The portraits along the walls seemed to watch her with eyes that glimmered into lightning. Finally, she reached the heavy oak doors that marked the edge of the north wing. They stood slightly open as if inviting her in. She pushed the door slowly. It creaked, a mournful sound that seemed to awaken the air inside. The smell of dust and forgotten perfume filled her lungs. The room beyond was massive, but silent. Moonlight fell across a grand staircase, draped in sheets. The portraits here were uncovered faces of people she didn't recognize, except one. A woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, her beauty haunting her smile, soft and secret. Beneath the paint, Evelyn realized with a start that it was Isabella Drake. Behind her, a voice spoke. "You shouldn't be here." Alexander stood in the doorway, soaked from rain, his shirt clinging to him, his face pale with anger, or maybe fear. For a long moment, neither of them moved. She held her breath as he stepped closer, his eyes locked on the portrait. "This was her world," he said softly. "She designed this wing herself, the gardens, the library, every inch of it. She believed beauty could heal a house, and now it's just a grave." His voice broke slightly on the last word. Evelyn felt the weight of grief in it. What happened to her? Evelyn whispered the question she had held for days. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window, staring out into the rain. Finally, he said, "She died here 2 years ago in this very room. The roof collapsed during a storm. She was trying to save one of the staff trapped by falling beams. I wasn't here to stop it." He turned toward Evelyn, his eyes hollow. "I built this house for her and it killed her." She reached out instinctively, placing a hand on his arm. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his body like smoke drifting away. "Why bring me here then?" she asked. "Why me?" His gaze softened, the light from the fire catching the faint lines of exhaustion on his face. "Because you remind me that not everything broken stays that way. You fight, you question, you refuse to bow. And maybe I thought if someone like you lived here again, this house might learn to breathe once more."
The confession caught her off guard. She felt her chest tighten. She wanted to believe there was something kind beneath his control, but another part of her whispered this man was still a stranger, still capable of darkness. He reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. For the first time his touch wasn't cold. Then a sound broke the moment, faint and sharp like glass cracking. Alexander's head turned sharply. "Someone's here," he whispered. "Stay behind me." He crossed the room, moving with quiet precision. A flash of movement darted near the window. A figure in black. Lightning struck again, revealing a face for just a heartbeat, a man's face, unfamiliar and full of rage. Before Evelyn could speak, Alexander lunged, but the intruder was gone, vanishing into the storm. The window left swinging open, rain spilling onto the floor. Alexander turned to her, jaw tight, eyes burning with fury. "You are never to leave your room after dark again. Do you understand?" he said, his voice low and fierce. But who was That she asked, trembling. No answer, only silence. As he locked the doors himself, she watched him go, realizing the north wing wasn't just haunted by the past. Someone living had just walked through its shadows, and the truth about Alexander Drake was growing darker by the hour. Morning came with a strange stillness, the kind that feels too quiet after a storm. Evelyn woke to find her door unlocked and a tray of breakfast left untouched on the table. The rain had stopped, but the air outside her window still shimmered with mist. She remembered the figure in black, the look of fury on Alexander's face, and the warning that followed. She was not to leave her room after dark, but rules meant nothing when fear was already living inside the walls. She dressed quickly, her curiosity gnawing stronger than her fear. The house was empty, or so it seemed as she made her way down the marble staircase. Faint voices drift Ed from the study. She stopped just out of sight. Alexander was speaking to someone, his tone cold and sharp like a blade slicing through silence. Find him, Alexander said quietly. I don't care how long it takes. He's been inside the estate once. He can get in again. If she's harmed because of this, there will be consequences. The other man, a bodyguard by his heavy voice, muttered, Yes, sir, before leaving through the back doors. Evelyn waited a moment before stepping into the room. Alexander stood by the window, his suit immaculate as always, but his eyes betrayed sleeplessness. She could see the tension in his jaw and the faint shadow of bruising along his knuckles. Whoever broke in last night, she said softly. You know him, don't you? He turned slowly, meeting her gaze. It doesn't matter who he was, he's gone now. She frowned. It matters to me, he sighed, the sound carrying years of weight. Some debts don't die with time, he said finally, and some ghosts come to collect when you least expect them. She hesitated, then asked, Were they here for me or for you? His silence was answer enough. Later that day the mansion was busy with activity. New guards patrolled the grounds, workmen repaired the shattered window in the north wing. Alexander's calm mask had returned, but Evelyn saw through it. Something was cracking beneath his surface. She followed him through the house, pretending to admire the artwork while he gave terse instructions to the staff. When he finally noticed her shadowing him, he stopped in the corridor. What are you looking for? He asked, not unkindly. The truth, she said quietly. He studied her for a long moment before saying, Dinner at 7. There are things you deserve to know, but not here, not where the walls can listen. When evening fell, the dining hall looked different. The table set for 2 candles flickering against the crystal glassware. Alexander sat across from her, a file resting on the table. Between them, he slid it toward her. Inside were photographs, bank statements, documents she didn't understand at first until she saw her father's signature on one of them.
This is the contract, he said, the agreement that bound you to me. But it's not the only thing your father signed 2 months before, that he sold part of his company's shares to a man named Victor Crane, the same man who broke into this house last night. Victor used those shares to fund weapons research under your father's name. Your father thought he was taking a loan, but he was being used. When he realized the truth, he begged for help. I was the only one who could protect him and you. Evelyn's hands trembled as she turned the pages, her father's desperate letters written in shaky handwriting. Alexander's own responses formal but urgent. You paid his debts, she whispered. You saved him. He nodded. I tried, but by the time I intervened, the damage was done. Your father didn't sell you, Evelyn. Not truly. He was cornered, and the contract was a way to shield you from what was coming. Her chest tightened with confusion and anger. So you married me to protect me from a man I've never met? She asked, her voice cracking. Alexander leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. No, I married you because it was the only way to make them stop looking for you. The words hung between them, heavy and cold. Who are they? She asked. But before he could answer, the lights flickered, the candles wavered, and the sound of shattering glass came from the hallway outside. Both of them turned as a guard burst through the door, his voice breathless. Someone breached the lower gate. Sir? They're inside the estate again. Alexander stood, his chair scraping across the marble as he reached for the gun hidden beneath the table. His voice was calm, but his eyes were fire. Stay behind me, Evelyn. Whatever happens, you don't run. You stay where I can see you. She wanted to speak, but fear gripped her throat. Another crash echoed closer, followed by shouting. Alexander motioned to his guards outside the room. The mansion that had felt like a prison now felt like a battlefield, and for the first time Evelyn realized that the stranger who had bought her was not the monster she feared. He was the shield standing between her and something far darker, closing in from the shadows. Gunfire shattered the silence of the estate, the sound echoing off the marble halls like thunder. Evelyn froze, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Alexander was already moving, his movements precise and cold, his guards spreading out through the corridors. The lights flickered again, then died, plunging everything into darkness. Only the flashes from outside lit the rooms in sharp bursts. "Stay down," he ordered, his tone calm, but his eyes sharp with calculation. He guided her behind the heavy oak table, pulling his gun free. The air smelled of smoke and fear. From somewhere near the entryway came the sound of boots on wet stone and a voice calling out, "Alexander Drake, you can't hide forever." It was Victor Crane. The name that had haunted the edges of their conversations. Evelyn had never seen him, but the malice in his tone made her blood run cold. Alexander's jaw clenched. He motioned for one of his men to circle behind the intruder, then turned to her, his voice low. "If they get to you first, they'll use you against me. Do you understand?" Evelyn nodded, too terrified to speak. The next instant, the front doors burst open, the storm outside sweeping through the entrance hall. Lightning illuminated the figure standing in the doorway. Victor Crane, tall, broad, with a cruel smile. He looked around the grand room as though it belonged to him. "Long time, Drake," he said, his voice casual, almost amused. "I see you finally opened your doors to guests again." Alexander stepped forward, weapon steady, his face expressionless. "You've already taken enough. You don't belong here," Victor chuckled. "Enough is never enough. You of all people should know that." "Where is she?" Evelyn held her breath, pressed into the sea. Shadows of the dining room. She saw the glint of Victor's gun as he scanned the room.
"You're not leaving this house alive," Alexander said, his voice low and dangerous. "You made that decision the moment you touched her name." "What name?" Victor sneered. "The girl's. She means nothing to me, only what she's worth." Alexander's shot cut through the air before he could finish the word. Victor stumbled back, blood blooming across his shoulder, but he laughed, the sound chilling even through the storm. Evelyn covered her ears as the guards rushed forward, returning fire. Glass exploded across the marble. Alexander pulled her from her hiding spot, moving fast through the corridors, every step filled with chaos behind them. The fighting raged on. He led her into a narrow passage she hadn't known existed, the stone walls cold and damp. "Where are we going?" she gasped. "The vault," he replied, short of breath. "There's protection down there." But his words were cut off by the sound of another voice behind them. "Don't bother running." The words slithered through the hall. Evelyn turned to see a shadow emerge from the dark. Victor again, his shirt soaked in rain, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You think money makes you untouchable," he said, raising his gun. Alexander stepped in front of her, aiming his weapon. The two men stood inches apart, their eyes locked. Evelyn could feel the weight of everything between them, years of rivalry and betrayal. Victor sneered, "You took everything from me, my company, my name, and now my revenge will take everything from you." His finger tightened on the trigger. Evelyn screamed as a shot rang out, but it wasn't Alexander who fell. Victor dropped to his knees, blood spreading across his chest, his gun clattering to the floor behind him. One of Alexander's guards lowered his weapon, breathing hard. "It's over, sir." Alexander knelt beside Victor, his expression unreadable. Victor coughed, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "It's never over, Drake. You can't bury what you did." His hand fell limp and the hall fell silent except for the pounding rain. Evelyn sank against the wall, shaking. Alexander turned to her, his expression softening. "It's done," he said quietly. "No," she whispered, "it's just beginning." That night the police came, the estate flooded with flashing lights and uniforms, the body removed, the staff questioned, but Alexander spoke little. When the officers left, he poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring into the fire. Evelyn watched him from the doorway. She could see the storm still raging inside him. "Who was he really?" she asked finally. Alexander didn't look at her. "A man I once called my brother," he said, the words almost a whisper. Before she could ask more, he added, "And now he's gone because of me." She stepped closer, her fear replaced by something deeper, a heavy ache of compassion. "Tell me the truth, Alexander, please." He met her gaze, his eyes darker than she had ever seen. "The truth," he said, "is that I didn't buy you to protect you. I bought you to atone for her death." "Her death?" Evelyn repeated. He nodded. "Isabella's. She was Victor's sister." The word struck her like thunder. Outside the window the storm raged on, but inside the silence was worse. She realized in that moment that everything, every secret, every lie had led to this one truth. She wasn't just a girl saved from debt, she was the living reminder of a man trying to balance a debt that could never truly be repaid. And now she knew that love and guilt had always been the same fire burning inside Alexander Drake. The morning after the Attack the mansion no longer felt like a fortress, it felt like a wound. The air was thick with the scent of rain and gunpowder. The marble floor still bore faint stains from the night before. Every sound seemed amplified: the ticking clock, the whisper of distant footsteps, the slow echo of fear that refused to leave. Evelyn had not slept. She sat in the library wrapped in one of Alexander's coats, her eyes fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace. He entered quietly, his presence filling the room as it always did, but there was something different in him now, something cracked beneath the surface.
You shouldn't be alone, he said softly. She looked up, her voice trembling. I'm not sure I know what alone means anymore. He moved closer, sitting across from her. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing exhaustion and something that looked like remorse. He set a folder on the table between them. These are the last of the documents about Victor and your father, he said. The truth is inside, but you need to be ready before you open it. She hesitated, then opened the file. The first page showed a bank transfer, the same night her father signed the marriage agreement. But the name on the account wasn't Victor's, it was Isabella Drake. Her breath caught. Isabella, she whispered. Alexander nodded, his eyes shadowed. Before she died, Isabella was trying to pay off your father's debts. She discovered Victor's scheme before anyone else. She wanted to help him, but the accident happened before she could act. I found the proof too late. Evelyn stared at him. You thought marrying me would finish what she started. He didn't deny it at first. It was redemption, he said quietly. A way to make peace with her memory, but then he stopped, his voice breaking. It became something else, something I can't undo. Before she could answer, the door burst open. One of the guards stepped in, his voice tight with urgency. Sir, you need to see this. He handed Alexander a phone. On the screen was a video feed from the estate's security cameras. In the footage, two men in black were moving through the north wing again. They're back, Evelyn whispered. Alexander stood immediately, his face turning to steel. Stay here, he ordered, but she rose too. I'm not hiding anymore. You can't keep me locked away. His jaw tightened, but he saw the determination in her eyes, and something in him yielded. Fine, he said, but stay close to me. They moved through the dim halls, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly. The closer they came to the north wing, the cold air. The air grew like the walls themselves were holding their breath when they reached the door. Alexander motioned for his guards to fan out, but before anyone could move, the lights went out, plunging everything into darkness. A voice drifted from the shadows, low, mocking. You thought it was over, Drake, but ghosts never rest. Evelyn's heart stopped. The voice wasn't Victor's, it was another man's, older, colder. Alexander's hand tightened on hers, his whisper barely audible. Stay behind me. The intruder stepped into the faint light of a flickering emergency lamp. He was dressed in black, his face half hidden, but Evelyn saw the scar across his cheek, the same man she'd glimpsed weeks ago near the gate. Alexander's voice was ice. What do you want? The man smiled. Revenge. You buried the truth with your wife. Now it's time it comes back to life. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small flash drive, tossing it across the floor. It slid to a stop at Alexander's feet. Everything you tried to hide is on there. Your wife, your deal, the accident, her death. It was never an accident, was it? The silence that followed was unbearable. Alexander's shoulders tensed. His eyes filled with shadows. He whispered, Leave, Evelyn. Go now. But she refused. No, not until I know what he means. The man's smile widened. Brave girl, ask your husband how Isabella really died. Before Alexander could react, the man pulled a gun, but a single shot rang out from behind. Alexander's guards had fired. The intruder fell silent. The drive lay near his outstretched hand. Alexander picked it up, his expression unreadable. Take it, Evelyn said. We need to know what's inside. That night when the house was quiet again, Alexander loaded the drive into his laptop. The video that appeared showed the night of Isabella's death, the storm, the collapsing roof. But what made Evelyn gasp was the voice in the background, not Alexander's, but Victor's, shouting orders, and then the sound of an explosion.
She turned to Alexander, tears in her eyes. She wasn't saving a servant, was she? He shook his head. She was saving me. Victor had rigged the beam to fall. The accident wasn't an accident. She died protecting me. Evelyn reached for him, her voice soft and shaking. You've been carrying her death like a chain, but it was never your fault. He looked at her, then eyes full of pain and gratitude. Maybe, he whispered, but every chain leaves scars. The truth had finally come to light, but in the fire of revelation. Something new was being forged. Their past had been built on lies, their bond on survival. Now the only thing left was to see if love could survive the weight of the truth, because somewhere in the shadows someone else was still watching, and this time they weren't after money, they were after blood. The next morning the air around the mansion felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The truth about Isabella had been revealed, but instead of peace it brought a new unease. Alexander had barely spoken since watching the footage. He sat in his study, the flash drive still clutched in his hand, staring at the rain streaking down the glass like falling ghosts. Evelyn stood in the doorway watching him. He looked older, somehow like the truth had carved something out of him. She wanted to go to him, but something in his stillness kept her frozen. He spoke without turning around. She died protecting me, and I spent 2 years believing I killed her. What kind of man does that to himself? The kind who feels he deserves the pain, she said quietly. He looked up, meeting her gaze, his voice lower than a whisper. The kind who does deserve it. Before she could answer, a guard appeared at the door. Sir, the police have finished their report about last night, but there's something else. We found tire tracks near the north fence. Someone else was there. Evelyn frowned. The man who broke in was not working. Was he? Alexander shook his head. Whoever sent him wanted the truth about Isabella buried or exposed for a reason we don't yet understand. Later that day she wandered through the mansion alone, her steps carrying her toward the north wing. Again something drew her there beyond curiosity. Maybe it was the echo of everything that had happened. A faint sound caught her attention, a whisper behind the old walls. It wasn't imagination. She followed it to the far corner where the plaster had cracked. A small piece of metal gleamed beneath. She pried it loose and pulled out a hidden box covered in dust. Inside were photographs, letters, and one old recorder. She pressed play. Static filled the air, then a woman's voice, soft and familiar. Isabella, if you're hearing this, then something has gone wrong. Her voice trembled. I discovered Victor's plans. He's been stealing from the company for years and using the money to fund weapons projects. If I can stop him, I will, but Alexander must never know I'm involved. Evelyn's hand shook. She stopped the recording, her heart pounding. Alexander had spent years haunted by guilt, and yet the woman he mourned had been living a secret life, one that had made her a target. She rushed back to the study. Alexander looked up as she burst in. I found this, she said, breathless. He took the recorder, listened to his late wife's words, his face changing with every second. Shock, sorrow, disbelief, then something colder. She lied to me, he whispered, his voice breaking. She lied to protect you, Evelyn said softly, and she died because of it. He stood abruptly, the firelight casting sharp shadows across his face. I have to finish what she started. If Victor was stealing from the company, someone else is still profiting from it. They're the ones who sent the man who broke in. Evelyn reached for him. Alexander, wait, but he was already gone. That night the storm returned, thunder rolling like an omen. Evelyn couldn't sleep. She paced her room until she heard it, the sound of a car starting below. She looked out the window. Alexander was leaving alone. She
threw on her coat and ran through the halls. The guards tried to stop her, but she didn't listen. By the time she reached the gates, his car was disappearing down the road. She jumped into the second car and told the driver to follow. The road wound through the mountains, rain blurring the view, headlights cutting through fog. Finally, they stopped outside an abandoned factory, its windows shattered, its roof sagging in the distance. Alexander's car was already parked. She stepped out, her heart pounding. She moved quietly through the shadows until she heard voices inside. "You're a hard man to kill, Alexander." A familiar voice sneered, Victor's associate, a man in a dark coat flanked by armed guards. "You should have stayed buried with your secrets." Alexander's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I came for answers, not survival." Evelyn hid behind a beam, watching the scene unfold. The man laughed. "You want the truth. Your wife found out we were selling weapons to foreign buyers. She planned to expose us. We couldn't allow that. She died because she played hero. You, however, have been useful. Your silence made us rich. But that ends tonight, doesn't it?" One of the guards lifted his gun, aimed directly at Alexander. Before Evelyn could think, she screamed, "No!" The sound shattered the tension. The shot fired too early. Alexander ducked, pulling his own weapon. Chaos erupted. She ran forward as gunfire filled the air, smoke and dust clouding everything she could hear. Alexander shouting her name, then silence. When the smoke cleared, the men were gone. Alexander was on his knees, blood on his shoulder, but alive. He looked up at her, his voice a rasp. "I told you to stay away." She knelt beside him, tears mixing with rain. "Not this time. You're not fighting alone." Sirens wailed in the distance, flashing lights reflecting off the wet pavement as police surrounded the building. The surviving guards were taken away, and the truth about the Wabialu Appin's smuggling operation began to unfold. The chief officer turned to Alexander and said, "Your wife wasn't just saving you, she saved countless lives." Back at the mansion later that night, Alexander sat beside Evelyn, his wound bandaged, his expression softer. "The ghosts are finally gone," he said quietly. "No," she answered, "they're still here, but maybe now they can rest." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You stayed even when you could have run. Why?" She smiled faintly, because sometimes the only way to save someone is to walk into their storm with them. Outside, the rain had stopped, and for the first time since she arrived at the estate, the dawn light broke through the clouds, soft and golden, promising that even after the darkest storms, there could still be something worth holding on to. The next few weeks passed in uneasy calm. The mansion stood quiet again, but the silence felt heavier than before. The police had cleared Alexander of wrongdoing, the smuggling network was exposed, and the men responsible imprisoned. Yet peace never came easily, not for Alexander, not for Evelyn. She often found him standing alone on the terrace, staring toward the forest as if expecting the past to walk back out of the shadows. One evening, as dusk painted the sky with crimson light, she joined him. He didn't turn when she spoke. "Do you ever think it's really over?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "The truth is never really over. It just changes form." She frowned. "What does that mean?" He sighed. "Victor wasn't the top of the chain. There's someone else. Someone with power enough to hide behind governments." Before she could respond, a car approached on the gravel drive, a sleek black vehicle that didn't belong to anyone in the household. Alexander tensed immediately. 3 men stepped out, wearing dark suits, the kind that spoke of power rather than protection. The one in front removed his glasses, revealing a calm Almo. "And polite smile, Mr. Drake," he said. "My name is Marcus Veer. I represent an organization interested in your late wife's research." Alexander's voice turned to ice. "That research was destroyed after the investigation." Marcus smiled. "Not all of it. We believe she sent copies of her data to someone here before she died." Evelyn felt her stomach twist. Alexander replied sharply, "You're mistaken. I burned everything myself." Marcus's expression never changed. "Then perhaps you won't mind if we have a look around." Alexander stepped forward, blocking the door. "This is private property. You have no right." Marcus's tone cooled, but his smile remained patience. "Mr. Drake, we always find what we're looking for, one way or another." That night, after the men left, Alexander locked the study and called his security team. "Double the guards. No one comes in or out without my order." Evelyn watched him pace, his mind working like a machine. She touched his arm. "Alexander, who are they?" He stopped his gaze. "Dark. They're not police or government. They're something else. Isabella once told me her research could save millions or destroy them if misused. I think she was right." Later that night, a storm rolled in, thunder shaking the windows again. Evelyn woke to the sound of footsteps outside her door. She froze, thinking it was the guards, but the rhythm was wrong, too slow, too deliberate. She rose quietly, opening the door. The hallway was dark, the air cold. Then she saw a faint light at the end of the corridor near the study. She moved closer, her heart pounding inside. She found the door slightly open, papers scattered across the desk and the window blown wide open, the wind howling through the room. "Alexander," she whispered. But he was gone. Panic surged. She grabbed a flashlight and ran through the halls, calling his name. Then she heard it from the garden, the crunch of gravel voices arguing. She moved to the window below in the courtyard. Alexander stood facing Marcus and 2 others. They had him surrounded. "We don't want to hurt you," Marcus said. "Just hand over the driver, and we'll leave." Alexander's voice was sharp. "I told you it's gone." Marcus smiled faintly. "Then you won't mind if we search the lady instead?" Evelyn gasped. She stepped back from the window, but too late. One of the men looked up and saw her. Alexander turned his head sharply. "Run!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the storm. She fled down the corridor, but the lights flickered and went dark again. Heavy boots echoed behind her. She reached the staircase just as a figure appeared from the shadows, blocking her path. It was Marcus. He smiled, the same calm smile as before. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Miss Hart, you have something that belongs to us. Before she could answer, Alexander appeared behind him, striking him hard. The two men crashed into the railing. The fight was brutal, silent except for the storm outside. Marcus's gun slid across the floor. Evelyn picked it up, her hands shaking. Alexander yelled, "Shoot!" But she froze, unable to pull the trigger. Marcus lunged, knocking her back. The gun fired once, the shot echoing like thunder. When the ringing stopped, Marcus was on the ground motionless. Alexander rushed to her, pulling her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean to." He cupped her face, his voice rough. "You saved us." The guards arrived moments later, but the damage was done. Marcus's phone lay shattered on the marble floor. Alexander picked it up, the screen still glowing with a message. "Incoming transmission. Phase 2 initiated." Evelyn looked at him in fear. "What does that mean?" He stared at the message, his expression unreadable. "It means this isn't over." "Not yet." The storm outside broke fully, lightning slicing the sky. The mansion plunged into darkness again, but this time the danger wasn't from ghosts or memories. It was from something far bigger, something that had started long before either of them knew the truth. Alexander held her close, his voice low. "We've uncovered something we were never meant to see, and now they'll come for both of us." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Then, what do we do now?" He met her gaze, the fire of determination returning. "We fight not for survival, not for redemption, but for everything they tried to take from us." And as thunder rolled across the night, Evelyn knew their battle was only beginning, and the love that had once been born out of a deal was now the only thing strong enough to stand against the storm coming for them both. The night after the attack, the mansion was silent, but the silence felt dangerous, not peaceful. Evelyn lay awake staring at the ceiling. The thunder had gone, but a deeper storm was growing, one that lived not in the sky, but in the space between truth and fear. She rose quietly, walking through the dark halls, her bare feet soft against the marble floor. She found Alexander in the library, his head in his hands, the glow of the fire throwing restless light across his face. "They know we're alive," he said without looking up, his voice rough. "They'll come again, they always do. Who are they really?" She asked, her voice trembling. "The organization that funded Victor, the one Isabella worked for, before she found out what they were doing. They wanted her research to build weapons, not to save lives. And now they think the final prototype is here." "Is it?" she whispered. He hesitated, then nodded. "The drive wasn't the end. She hid a second copy before she died, but I never found it." Evelyn's heart pounded. Where would she have hidden something like that? His eyes lifted to hers. "That's the problem. She wouldn't have trusted me to look. She would have left it with someone innocent, someone untouched." Evelyn froze, the words sinking in me. Before he could answer, the lights cut out, the fire dimmed to embers. The security alarms blared through the house. Alexander leapt to his feet, grabbing her hand. "We have to move now." They ran through the corridor, the sounds of shouting guards and breaking glass filling the air. Armed men dressed in black stormed through the main doors, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The walls shook as gunfire erupted. Alexander pushed Evelyn into the hidden passage behind the staircase. "Stay here, no," she said fiercely. "You can't fight them alone." He gripped her shoulders, eyes burning. "If they get me, you run. Promise me you'll run." She didn't promise, but he kissed her forehead once, then turned and disappeared into the smoke. She waited only a moment before following the noise. The mansion had become chaos, men shouting, guns firing, the air thick with smoke and fear. She moved toward the library and froze. The intruders had cornered Alexander, forcing him to the ground. Marcus's voice echoed through the chaos. Though he should have been dead, he was alive. His arm bandaged, his face twisted in hatred. "Did you really think you could bury us?" he snarled, kicking Alexander to the floor. "Your wife tried to stop us, and look where it got her. Now, you'll watch the same happen to the girl." Evelyn stepped out from behind the wall, her voice shaking. "Leave him alone." Marcus turned slowly, his grin spreading. Well, the girl herself." Before she could react, he raised his gun, but Alexander lunged, knocking him backward. The weapon fired once, the sound deafening. The bullet struck a marble pillar, sparks flying. The two men struggled, the fight raw and desperate. Evelyn looked around, searching for anything to help her. Eyes fell on the broken lamp on the floor. She grabbed the heavy metal base and swung it with all her strength, striking Marcus across the head. He collapsed against the wall, his gun skidding across the floor. Alexander, breathing hard, pulled her close. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "No, but he's not done." They turned toward Marcus, who laughed through the blood on his lips. "You think you've won," he whispered. "You have no idea what she left behind." Then he slumped unconscious. Police sirens wailed in the distance. The guards had called for help. Alexander pulled Evelyn into his arms, his voice low and steady. "It's over." She looked up at him. "No, it's not. Not until the truth is found." A week later, the mansion stood quiet again, the damage repaired, but the air still carried ghosts. Alexander and Evelyn sat together in the north wing, the morning sun spilling through the tall windows, the light soft and golden. She held a small wooden box they had found hidden behind Isabella's piano. Inside was a single flash drive and a letter. "If you're reading this, it means the truth has found you." Isabella's voice trembled through the page. "The research you seek isn't meant for destruction. It's a cure, a way to repair damaged cells, to give life where death once lived. Don't let them twist it. Protect it. Protect each other. Love is the only thing worth saving in the end." Tears blurred Evelyn's vision. Alexander took her hand. "She gave her life for something good," he said softly. "Now it's our turn to finish what she began." She smiled faintly. "What will you do with it?" He looked out toward the horizon. "Build the hospital." She dreamed of a place for healing, not control. Months passed. The world outside began to change. The headlines told of the collapse of the organization that had hunted them. Alexander and Evelyn stood at the opening of a new medical foundation named after Isabella Drake. It stood not as a monument to death, but to second chances. Reporters filled the garden, cameras flashing. But when Alexander took the stage, his speech wasn't about power or wealth. It was about redemption. He spoke of love found in the ashes of guilt, and of a girl who taught him that forgiveness was stronger than fear. Later, as the crowd faded, Evelyn stood beside him, the evening sun setting over the vineyard surrounding the new hospital. He turned to her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "You changed, Eva." "Everything," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "You did. You bought my life, but gave me freedom." He smiled, the first true smile she'd ever seen, then whispered, "No, Evelyn. You gave me back my soul." The wind swept gently through the vines, the sky burning with gold and crimson, and for the first time since their lives collided, there were no more secrets, no debts, no ghosts, only the promise of a future built not on contracts or guilt, but on love, the kind that no money could ever buy.